Empty Void Vivian Hugo teams up with Flashy Flash Julian Loki to take on the team of the Destroyer and the Dominator of the Universe, the Ittoshi brothers, with their potential unleashed. A matchup that will rock Blue Lock in the U20 World Cup Finals, when Sai finally accepts Ren and they go on to challenge the Destiny duo. And so in today's video, we are going to look at each duo's stats, abilities and their most impressive feats, in order to determine who would be the most dominant duo at the end of the U20 World Cups. Now, usually in one-on-one matchups, I go over each player and what they can do physically as well as their best weapons and abilities. However, seeing that this is a duo fight and teamwork might be more important than any singular feat, in today's video we will only account for weapons that actually serve a purpose when they are used in tandem with the other player. And this actually will get really interesting because one weapon that for example would be ignored with Loki could actually be used with Ren, because depending on how the weapon is used, it determines its effectiveness in a team setting. However, without any further ado, let's actually start with the French duo. Let's start with Hugo and Loki's physicality. Now obviously, whenever Loki is included, his speed is without a doubt the biggest threatening weapon, and today's matchup is actually no different, because as we've seen in the France game, Loki is not just the fastest, but also the way he utilizes his speed in tandem with his teammates is actually rather perfect. Loki can all of a sudden close any opening left by his teammates due to that explosive speed. However, get this, despite how insanely OP this speed is, it is not the only threatening thing regarding this duo's physicality. As you see, both Loki and Hugo can jump very high. I wouldn't say they are on Kunigami or Shido's level, but they are very good in the air and could considered as one of the best. And I kinda get it with Hugo because he is very tall, but for some reason Loki can jump very high as well. And I think this is because his legs are not only good at running, but also at jumping, and as we will see later, at shooting. Moreover, in the same boat of their jumping ability, we can talk about their strength, because both Loki and Hugo are extremely strong. Again, Hugo is mad beefy, and so you would expect him to really be that tanky. But with Loki, it is once again thanks to his legs. Loki, with that insane acceleration and speed, can force his way through in situations that he has no right being that powerful at. And so I found these two aspects specifically rather interesting with this duo. Hugo is oppressive because he has the physique for that, but Loki does it because of his legs. In any case, however, finally we have their endurance, and this is the most irrelevant stat because all four players of today's matchup actually have insane stamina that allow them to go full game with no issue. I mean, Loki specifically was yawning at the end of the Japanese game, even though he was running left and right. However, enough about their physicality, let's actually get to the good stuff. Let's talk about Loki and Hugo's abilities and weapons. Now, unlike what I will do with Sai and Ren, here I want to talk about the French duo in tandem with each other. And this is because these two kinda complete each other. They don't just fit together like Hiyori and Isagi or Sai and Shido. No, these two quite literally complete each other. And this makes their dynamic one of the most interesting in the show. However, the first weapon we are going to start with is actually not Loki's speed, which I know we spoke about it in their physicality, but it is so oppressive that it deserves to be a weapon of its own. However, we are not going to start with that, but rather we are going to start with Hugo's mentality and his suitability theory, because what makes this duo function is this philosophy specifically. In fact, not only that, this mentality of his has to be one of the best mentalities we've seen in Blue Lock. Obviously, I still think Noah has the best, but Hugo's mentality is so strong that it actually beat Ego's philosophy. And I know at the end he lost to Isagi and he showed him that there is still room for him to grow, but even as it is right now, it is still one of the most oppressive philosophies in the show. As I said, second only to Noah, and even beats Snuffy and Ego's philosophies. However, why is that? Why is Hugo's mentality this oppressive? And more importantly, why is it so crucial for the French duo? Well, you see, because of his suitability theory, Hugo can push his entire team to play at their 100%. And this is the first time we've seen someone pull something like this. Before, we usually have seen attacking midfielders push the strikers to perform at 100% their efficiency. However, we've never seen someone does it with the entirety of the team. That's what made France so oppressive. It was a whole unit at 100%. However, for us this means that with an exception to an awakening, Hugo can literally make Loki perform at his peak throughout the game. And at the same time, he can also understand the motives of Sai and Ren easily, because he understands how they think and what's most suitable for them. And we know this will play a huge role because of Ren's emotional state, which, since we are judging Ren based on his full potential, I know it's not going to be that big of a deal, but even if it exists at such a small scale, Hugo will still be able to exploit that. However, that's not all. You see, Hugo is not capable of reading the situation perfectly solely because of his mentality. Rather, it is also thanks to his insane ocular ability, the cog eyes. Now, we don't have any official explanation for these eyes. However, from the way Hugo utilized them, they seem to be a mix of Charles Sniper eyes as well as his mentality of analyzing the most suitable route to take in any given situation. You see, thanks to these eyes, Hugo can glance at the field and immediately understand every option he has. Then, with his insane brain and his mentality, he can analyze and dissect everything rationally. He can understand how to exploit his enemies well, and overall he can have a near perfect grasp of the field currently. Which also means that because he is a talented learner, Hugo must present metavision, and it is on Karasu and white hair Isagi, meaning it is one of the best metavisions in the show. However, and again, much with his cog eyes, all of this is just speculation. None of this has been confirmed, and please take everything with a grain of salt. However, judging from how things went in the French, we can actually reach this resolution. And the perfect example of this would be the final chance that was created by Karasu and Isagi. You see, Karasu in the French game was so oppressive that the whole team shifted into trying to stop him, Baro, Shido, and Hiyori. I mean, to be honest, he was so oppressive that they left a dangerous player such as Ren completely unguarded. However, Isagi was still lurking in the shadows and was able to exploit this as soon as Loki countered Hiyori. However, Hugo, being the genius that he is, was still able to cover Baro within the Karasu system, but at the same time keep himself in a position where he could still counter Isagi and Ren. And as you all know, I have always said this, if it wasn't for the stupid nerf required by the plot, Isagi's whole play would not work. I'm not talking about the gamble shot. Once we reach that point, it is fair. However, Isagi should not have been able to reach that point altogether. The Hugo we've seen in chapter 331 should have been able to account for Isagi's spinning and should have been able to engulf him much like he did before and stop him from turning. However, even if we don't take this nerf into consideration, the fact that he was able to put himself in a position where he could counter 3 oppressive players, being Baro, Isagi, and the loose Ren, is still so impressive and honestly the biggest perception feat we've seen up until now. Yes, in the entirety of Blue Lock, I think this feat could even rival what Snuffy was doing to Bastard Munich in the Uber's game. And again, for today's matchup, this means that Hugo could simultaneously account for Sai and Ren, and at the same time coordinate perfectly with Loki. That's how big his brain really is. However, and speaking of Loki, how can the French speedster actually keep up with Loki? Well, it is honestly pretty simple. It's all thanks to his speed and above average perception. Now, as you all know, Loki is the fastest player in the realm of Blue Lock, and he is only rivaled by the likes of Noah and Prince. However, if Loki was only fast, that would not actually be that interesting. Rather, thanks to his impressive perception, Loki knows exactly when and where to use his speed, and this is so effective to the point even the insane metavision users like Isagi and Karasu cannot expect what Loki is about to do at all times, because you really never know when he will burst into existence. However, up until this point, I'm talking about Loki's speed in terms of the individual feats, and when we move to how he uses it with Hugo, it obviously won't be as broken as it usually is. Or will it? You see, I truly believe that Loki's speed is even scarier when he is teamed up with Hugo, and that's for 2 reasons. First, as I stated, is his perception, because through it Loki can coordinate with Hugo very easily. And secondly, it is because Hugo understands Loki better than anyone. Hugo understands how to get the best of Loki, Hugo understands how to best use Loki, and Hugo can also coordinate with Loki the best. And so, in all honesty, if Loki's speed was scary individually, it gets honestly extremely busted when he is paired up with Hugo. And by the way here, I'm talking both on offense and on defense. We've seen Hugo utilize Loki to the fullest, both defensively and offensively. Hell, Hugo is so good at utilizing Loki, he even used the most oppressive weapon, which is his speed, as a bait in order for Charles to score at the beginning of the Japanese game. Which, in all honesty, I don't know who you would consider more threatening. The guy with the busted speed, or the guy who can fully utilize that speed. And this is why this duo works so well and why it is considered the best duo in the U20 category right now. However, let's actually get deeper. Let's talk about how they complete each other. But first, let's talk about Hugo's dueling ability. You see, Hugo is rather beefy, and because of that, by himself he is a great duelist. We've never seen anyone challenge him physically to a duel and still win, or at least hold him, with the exception of Kunigami. However, if you require someone as beefy and busted as Kunigami to stop you, then your dueling ability is through the roof. Even dribblers like Ren or players who can copy them like Ryo cannot do anything against Hugo's oppressive dueling ability. However, if by any miracle any player can surpass Hugo and beat him in a duel, Loki is usually lurking by in order to snatch the ball immediately. And the same could be said about Loki. Now, Loki himself is a great duelist as well, and it's not because he is beefy or can read the situation like Hugo or he has insane dribbling like Bachara or Lorenzo. Rather, his entire dueling ability again comes from his speed. On defense, it is hard to get past a player who keeps on coming with that insane speed, and on offense, it's honestly just hard to keep up. And so, as I said, Loki himself is a great duelist, but much like we've seen in the Japanese game, once Loki is beaten one-on-one, Hugo is always nearby in order to close any gaps left by Loki. And we have never seen this being done to this level. I mean, the closest we've got is Kaiser and Isagi against Ren, but even still, that does not even compare to what Hugo and Loki are doing right now. In fact, Loki is so fast that he could cover Hugo in so many ways. Because Hugo's design spanned the entirety of the field, no matter where Loki is, he could still hold Hugo's back. And honestly, this is just crazy and broken. The fact that Hugo and Loki alone were able to hold 5 strikers from Japan is honestly just scary. However, if you could believe it, that's not all to this duo. Because next, let's talk about Hugo's passing ability and Loki and Hugo's shooting ability. First, let's start with the passing. You see, while he is not as impressive as Charles or his opponent today, Sai, Hugo still has one of the best passing ability in the show. And here's the thing, it is broken not because he has good passes. Once again, it is broken thanks to his suitability theory and his mentality. Because Hugo can understand what's the most suitable pass to deliver and then simply follow that idea. And we've seen this being used with Loki to the best extent. In their second goal against Japan, where Hugo delivered a pass that can only be matched by Loki. Now the pass itself does not need to be accurate or have a crazy trajectory. It just needs to be fast enough so Loki can be the only one reacting to it. However, once he does that, Loki presents one of the best shooting abilities in the show. And on top of that, he also presents the Predator Eyes. However, I don't think either would be that interesting for today's matchup. I don't think his ability to shoot and reliably score is that important. We know that he can do that, and so let's not even explore it. Instead, let's explore Hugo's shooting, which is rather impressive for a defensive midfielder like him. And unlike Loki, this is important because it gives Hugo an extra option rather than just passing to Loki. If Hugo can score by himself and at the same time give perfect passes to Loki, his danger status increased by a huge margin. And overall, I gotta say, from the little showing that they have shown us in the Japanese game, Hugo and Loki truly lived up to the hype and truly represent the ultimate synchronization of a duo in the U20 World Cups. However, can Empty Void and Flashy Flash beat the destroyer and dominator of the universe? Sai and Ittoshi, the ultimate family name in the realm of Blue Lock. This one family name right here brings terror to almost every Blue Locker because it represents a name that only produces excellence. Whether be it talented learners or geniuses, the Ittoshi brothers really reign supreme. However, as always, let's start with their physicality. Now, immediately I'm going to say I'm not going to bore you too much here, because both Ren and Sai are well-rounded players. Ren seems to be slightly stronger than Sai, but overall I would say they are still close and they are still both well-rounded. And this obviously means that they are both fast, they are both strong, and they can jump very high. Obviously, they are not close to being the best at any of these categories, however, they are above average in all of them, meaning they don't actually have any glaring weakness in their physicality. However, enough blabbering about this, let's actually get to the most important stuff. Let's talk about the Brothers of Destruction's abilities and weapons. Now, unlike what I did with Hugo and Loki, I am not going to talk about their weapons in tandem with each other. Rather, I am going to start with Sai and then move to Ren. And this is because I intended for this video to be full potential Sai and full potential Ren. However, it means different things for both players. With Sai, his full potential is just us actually dissecting his performance in the U20 game and comparing the weapons he used there with the weapons that we know. For example, him bringing 100% of his striker and how Ness did it at the end of the PXG game. As for Ren, his full potential is completely different and we will talk about it when we get to him. For now, let's start with the elder brother, let's start with Sai Ittoshi. And immediately, because this is a team matchup, let's talk about his passing ability. Now get this, as far as we've seen in this show, no one comes close to Sai in terms of accuracy of his passes. We've seen him being able to squeeze a ball through very tight spaces, to the point it almost seems impossible. And of course, the biggest example of this would be his pass to Shido in his drag and drive goal. He was able to deliver the ball perfectly to Shido, and at the same time, it was only 2 inches away from Chigiri, who jumped thinking he reached the most optimal spot to jump. And honestly, this is impressive beyond belief. To be able to squeeze the ball from that distance while having just 2 inches as leeway is rather insane and broken by every metric. And honestly, with the exception of Charles and maybe Hiyori and Ness, we are yet to see anyone remotely close to this in terms of passing. Obviously, players like Ren, Loki, Baro, and Kaiser with their Predator eyes have very accurate shots. But in terms of passing, no one comes close to Sai, with Charles being the only competition here. However, and of course, that's not all there is to his passing ability. You see, in addition to being a sniper, Sai also has the ability to deliver a plethora of variant passes and to modify the trajectory of said passes however he likes. And here, while he was better at accuracy than Charles, I think Sai is only second to Charles in this regard. And this is because the French imp has shown us more variant passes in the PXG game than Sai did in the U20 game. Now obviously, because Sai was not trying in that game, this could mean that his ability to deliver variant passes is much better than this, and he could be better than Charles, but for now we really can't account for that. Moreover, if we talk about the passes themselves, Sai packs quite the punch with those passes. Not only are they very accurate, powerful and fast, Sai's trajectories are also very extreme and sometimes are near impossible for the defenders and regular strikers to react to. And this is why he requires an insane striker like Shido or his partner today Ren in order for them to catch and turn his passes into goals. However, if the striker is capable of reacting to Sai's passes, the duo unlocks such a high possibility at scoring, it's honestly not funny. And that's all thanks to one more weapon that Sai presents in terms of his passing. And I know at this point the guy is a Swiss knife with his passing. However, that's just how broken the cam of the new Gen 11 is. Now, what am I talking about here? Well, you see, if Hugo is all about suitability and going for the most suitable play, Sai and a little bit Ness are all about pushing their strikers in order to achieve goals or feats that they cannot achieve otherwise. And of course, we've seen this from Ness at the end of the PXG game where he gave a pass to a Kaiser that has to awaken. However, that was not the first time we've seen that feat, because we've seen it from Sai before. Not only that, we've seen the elder Ittoshi brother deliver passes that are very challenging for their strikers and push them to evolve. They took a trash striker like Sendo and made him into a threat that Ren had to intervene in order to stop. I mean, even Sendo himself said that there is no way for current him to actually react to that pass. However, he then fired himself and said that he needs to evolve and needs to reach a new level in order to score. And this will prove to be very deadly with Ren today, especially because the latter always requires new impulses in order to perform his best performance. Sai with these insane passes could keep challenging Ren until the latter achieved new heights. And in fact, we have seen this from Shido. Sai kept on pushing him until the latter awakened and scored the best goal in Blue Lock at that point, and one of the best goals up until today. And I have no doubt that with Berserker Ren, Sai could push him to reach heights that we have never seen in Blue Lock before. And this is why I said that potential Sai like this and Ren at his peak performance are actually capable of challenging Hugo and Loki. However, let's carry on, because having insane passes are obviously not everything there is to Sai. I mean, any broken midfielder cannot just rely on his passing ability. As we've seen with Ness, even if your passes are just insane, the fact that most players could see you and account for you means that your passes cannot even reach the striker you want. And usually cams deal with this in two ways, whether it be a dribbling like Hiyori or Lorenzo when they play on offense, or insane off-the-ball movements like Charles does. However, get this, Sai actually has both. He has a busted broken dribbling ability and has metavision and the ability to perfectly position himself. And this honestly is just scary. Sai is always looking for the most optimal spot to position himself. And even if different players react to him, his insane dribbling ability is one hell of a weapon and would allow him to get past any defender that tries to stop him and then deliver his passes. However, it's not just that, because I am speculating that Sai also presents the sniper eyes. It only takes one glance for Sai to immediately understand where he needs to pass, which for us means that even if his opponent has insane perception and an insane dueling ability, and Sai cannot shake him off that easily, Sai could still do what he already does, and give himself 1 second from where he can forward the ball. Obviously, this is not as effective as him dribbling past the player, but this remains as an option against the most oppressive of duelists. And here's the thing, as you can see guys, I am only talking about Sai individually, but all of his weapons actually shine in tandem with another player. And this is why I said that this matchup is closer than what people think. It's all thanks to Sai and how insane of a team player he is. And honestly, if Peak Ren could match him, this matchup would be legendary. And in fact, let's actually talk about the baby Ittoshi brother. Let's talk about Ren Ittoshi. Now obviously, since we are talking about Peak Ren here, we are going to only talk about his Berserker state, as base Ren actually fell off during the NEL, and he honestly can no longer compete. Even in the Nigerian and the French game, when it seemed as if it was base Ren, we later discovered that he actually learned to tame the Berserker state, which obviously was a mistake, and he needs the Berserker state to always be raging on in order for Ren to actually keep on improving. And so for today's video, we are going to only take Ren at his ultimate Berserker form, the unleashed Berserker form without any regards for anyone but himself on the pitch. Which I know this is a team's matchup, but trust me guys, if you are so good at turning insane passes into goals, then by definition you are one hell of a team player. Now, to start talking about Berserker Ren, first let's address the elephant in the room. Let's address his mentality. Ren, while in the Berserker state, is quite nasty and is kinda hurtful for his team. And we've seen that on full display in the PXG game and later in the France game, where funny enough he turned a guaranteed shot by Isagi into a gamble of whether it would hit the bar or not. However, because we are taking in Peak Ren, and because he is playing next to his brother, which here I assume Sai would tell him, I'll give you another chance if you go full out and we beat these two. So you bet your sweet ass that Ren will be completely focused and he will be completely engulfed into the game. And so what usually hurts Ren in these matchups, which is his mentality, is no factor in today's video, all thanks to his brother Sai. But since we are not going to talk about his mentality, which usually is his weakest point, let's actually talk about his strongest, which in the case of Berserker Ren is none other than his dueling ability. Now, unlike dribblers like Bachira or Lorenzo, where they use their insane dribbler in order to surpass players, and unlike Hugo and Kunigami that use their physical might in order to force their way through, Ren is kinda the mix between the two. He presents an insane dribbling ability on Bachira and Lorenzo's level, and at the same time he has a weapon that allows him to utilize his opponent's physicality against them, and thus he takes the best of both worlds. He is a great dribbler and he also easily wins the physical altercations. And for a striker, honestly this is all you need. As I've said, no one really beats Ren, with the exception of course to the pros. However, this alone is not really enough for today's matchup. At the end of the day, it's more of an individual weapon. Well, that would be true if Sai was not his teammate, because Sai could deliver a perfect pass where only Ren with his insane instincts and his insane genius could react and turn that pass into a goal. However, what about this dueling ability on defense? Well, you see, I honestly believe Ren is second only to Lorenzo in terms of dueling on defense. And that's once more all thanks to his instincts and his impulses. Because Ren is probably the biggest genius in Blue Lock, he has an innate talent to stop players. First, obviously with his insane perception that cannot really be explained, where he constantly knows what's the perfect route to take. But also in the same fashion as him doing it on offense, Ren can dissect his opponents and destroy them in a duel defensively as well. And we've seen this at full display against Isagi, where he told him, by just sticking to you in a 4-meter radius, I can stop your off-the-ball movements completely and I can stop your slipperiness completely. And funny enough, this could actually be used in tandem with Sai's insane perception, because Ren could hold the bulk of the dueling and Sai would do his best circling around Ren and trying to catch any loose ball. all. I don't think they could do it to the extent of Kazura and Isagi, and that's all because Sai has not shown many great feats defensively. But for the very least, with the bare minimum we've seen from Sai in that game, we know that this is possible to a certain extent. However, there is yet another weapon that Ren uses in order to win his duels, which is his Predator Eyes. Now I know with Loki I said that the Predator Eyes are individualistic weapon. However, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's all thanks to how they are used. Someone like Baro, someone like Kaiser, someone like Ren, they use the Predator Eyes to hunt for opportunities, in addition of course to using them to shoot and score. However, for the likes of Yuki and Loki, we've only seen them used in order to shoot. However, going back to Ren, how does he use his Predator Eyes on defense and offense? Well, offensively, I think it's more individualistic, because he can snipe the most optimal route from where he can shoot. But defensively, it honestly gets interesting, because through them we've seen him even be able to hunt the connection of Kaiser and Isagi, which honestly was so impressive and would be so important for today's matchup, because if there is one player who could react to the team of Hugo and Loki, it's honestly full potential Ren. However, Ren at the end of the day is a striker, and so let's talk about his ability to score. Because Ren has the best shot in the entirety of Blue Lock. And I mean here the project of Blue Lock. I know in the U20 category someone like Kaiser beats him and the pros like Noah and Prince have better. But for Japan and the project of Blue Lock, Ren definitely has the best shooting ability, rivaled only by Baro. And what makes his shooting ability so insane is first, of course, his accuracy, which thanks to the Predator Eyes, it is no longer a special thing and it is kind of an individualistic weapon. But his Berserker style allows him a perk of shooting while crashing with other players, because he can understand the physicality of his opponents. Ren could crash to them in a way that destroys them and at the same time allows him to shoot a very powerful shot, meaning Ren is almost near impossible to stop head on, and one needs to cover his shooting course from afar in order to stop him. And this works wonders with Sai, because the latter could give him a pass in a way that only Ren's instinctive play and his impulses could be able to react to that. And finally, let's actually talk about those specific impulses. You see, what makes Ren so threatening and so oppressive in his Berserker state? The more impulse you give him, the more he kicks your ass. And as I said, with Sai constantly challenging him, those impulses would make Ren reach a level that honestly could even rival Loki. Obviously in different ways. Loki does it through his speed, but Ren does it through his impulses. And I honestly believe Ren might be the key into stopping Loki in the finals. However, for today's matchup, this means that the more the matchup is challenging, that the more the fight gets intense, the more Sai challenges Ren would only get better. And honestly, in tandem with his brother, they make up one of, if not the strongest duo in Japan. However, can the Brothers of Destruction actually beat Empty Void and Flashy Flash? For how this matchup would go, I honestly went into it thinking it's going to be a little bit one-sided, but as I was developing the script for it, I realized that the way Sai plays, he is such a great team player that things get very close. And with Ren playing with his brother, and the way his impulses and his Berserk state function, Ren could actually elevate himself also to that level, meaning this matchup is honestly close, and it is one of the most fun matchups I had on this channel, period. I honestly need to do duos more often, because this matchup proved to be very interesting. In any case, however, let's jump to how would this go. Now, in terms of who would be the most efficient duo, there is just no question. The presence of Hugo negates what Sai and Ren could do at the early stages. In terms of being the most stable, the most consistent team, there is no doubt about it. Hugo and Loki are definitely better. These two could function at their 100% all the time, and that's all thanks to the suitability theory. However, as I said, in terms of his strikers, Sai is able to push them even beyond their current 100%. And up until now, we don't know if Hugo is capable of that. We don't know if Hugo is capable of pushing his suitable players beyond their 100%. However, we definitely know that with Sai. And so, even though Hugo is the most consistent, I think Sai could potentially push Ren into reaching beyond his 100%, which in certain cases could actually be even better than what Hugo and Loki could do. However, However, as you all know in Blue Lock, being reproducible and being consistent is more important than flashiness and more important than just dying in a singular burst. And so the scale still tips towards Hugo and Loki despite how crazy Sai would make Ren. And there is another factor to this as well, which is Loki. Loki in his base form, Loki in his most relaxed state is still one hell of a player. And we've seen that their ultimate synchronization that happened in chapter 343 was not their peak performance. Loki still yawned after doing that, meaning that was a regular Tuesday for him. And this poses another question. How would Sai and Ren realistically beat a play like that? I mean, on defense, I don't think Ren could stop Loki. Even if he gets in front of him, I think Loki could zigzag beyond him. And there is no way for Ren to stop Loki if he is on him. Hugo sends the ball in a way that only Loki's speed could match it. And so once they see the ball coming, only Loki could react to it. And as I said, the only way Ren could stop Loki is by intercepting where the ball would fall. However, that would not work in this setting because Hugo could actually expect where Ren is going and give the ball into a different position where only Loki could react to it. Now obviously, Sai could do the same with Ren. As I said, Sai could give him a pass that even with both Loki and Hugo on him, Ren could still pull some seriously sick shit and beat both of them in a duel and score. Now obviously, as we've seen in the France game, this is not consistent 100% because by utilizing Loki, Hugo is completely able to shut out Ren. But you have to understand it from this perspective. This is peak Ren we're talking about. This is Ren fueled by his emotions of playing next to Sai. This is Ren that is constantly being challenged by his brother. And so if anyone could do it, I think Ren could beat Hugo and Loki in a duel and still score. But the main issue here, it's not going to be as consistent as Loki and Hugo. And I feel like this is a theme at this point. At their peak, I feel like Sai and Ren could reach and even maybe a small chance to surpass Hugo and Loki. But throughout a game and consistently, I don't see Sai and Ren be able to challenge Hugo and Loki. And specifically for this reason, I think the winner of today's matchup is definitely Hugo and Loki. I think it gets close at times thanks to how Sai is perfect in a team setting, but overall throughout a full game and dropped in any random team, I think Hugo and Loki are far more consistent and far more dominant than the Ittoshi brothers. And so they will be the ones walking with the W today. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.